Yo, we're talking relevance, new podcast. Hit me up. I tricked Mike King into doing a podcast. He hates podcasts. Yo, what's up, Mike?
It says the meeting is being recorded, and if I don't like it, I can leave. So,
Damn, you can't even do me like that. No, today, lots of conversations in the space. You're talking to a lot of CMOs and VPs who are, really cognizant of the changing nature of search with conversational search, ChatGPT, AI mode. What are you hearing and what are you recommending?
yeah, I mean, the general thing is they just want to know, like, what do they have to do to get visibility in these channels? And they're not understanding the nuances. They don't even know if it's different from search or whatever. They're just assuming it's AI. So, like, what do we need to do to be an AI? And they know that, SEOs are the people that historically have gotten you into spaces like that. And so, one, it's just a huge opportunity for us to define what it is and how it works and so on. But ultimately, they just care about, like, when I type in, who's the best, whatever, do we show up? And so I walked them through the mechanics of it. I walked them through, like, how it's similar, how it's different, where the overlapping opportunities are, where you need to do things differently. And they're very leaned in on it because they're like, wait, okay, this is different. There is these synthetic queries. Okay, we got to approach this as though like it's an omni-media effort. And so that resonates with people because it speaks more to the marketing mix rather than just a single channel. And so what we walk them through is like, okay, the first step is like figuring out what are these hidden queries that we need to rank for, and then figuring out like what are the assets that we can leverage to rank for that, constellation of queries. And then how do we deploy more things across our assets? So it's more akin to like how you would do a reputation management campaign, wherein you're like, okay, it's not just about our site, it's also, places where people review things. It's places that are like social media, places that are like your earned media and things of that nature. And so you have to have this omni-media content plan to make it happen. And so ultimately that really resonates because again, it speaks to a marketing mix and they're like, cool, well, I can bring in this team, I can bring in this team, and we can actually do a thing here. Like we do a concerted effort to make this happen. And then what comes up is measurement, which is also, not really defined well at this point. And I think that, within the channels themselves, I think what Profound is doing makes a lot of sense. Like where they're looking at share of voice, they're looking at citation visibility, they're looking at sentiment. And sentiment is, kind of up in the air because technically these systems are supposed to give you a neutral response. But the reality is if the user asks for something that's not neutral, it's also going to get you a not neutral response. So you do want to get a sense of like, okay, what's the sentiment of the citation and also what's the sentiment of how you're appearing in these results. So there's that aspect of it. But then specifically as it relates to Google, I think we need to think of, brand versus performance measurement, right? So there's the aspect of, yes, there is some referral traffic that's still happening. You can't parse out whether or not it came from AI overviews, AI mode, or classic search. But what you can parse out is it performing? Do these people actually do a thing on my website? And you can get a sense of, do you appear in AI mode, AI overviews, and so on? And then you can track that visibility. What these people do on your site is the same as it always is. Like, are they converting, what have you? But then there's the brand aspect that you need to be looking at because there is value in the impressions where a user has typed in a non-branded term and your brand appears in the AI overview, AI mode, or even featured snippets. And so taking credit, well, first understanding, are you there? And also taking credit for that is something that we need to be doing so that we can show the value of this channel. Because again, the reality is that the referral traffic is going to be very small. And so these CMOs, like that's what they care about. They care about how do we measure it? How do we appear? And then what does this look like strategically and how we engage a team to actually make it happen?
It's so interesting to me because what you're saying, and this is like the one of the disconnects, is that it's not about throwing out SEO. You're not throwing out anything that you're doing. You're basically just adding this layer, this nuanced layer that's intentional as a program of how you can incorporate everything you're already doing well to also make sure that it's optimized might not be the right word, but intentionally visible on all these new changing channels. And like you've worked through this in your mind. How are you like kind of what should CMOs be telling their teams like day one?
Yeah, one, I would say it's just a time for experimentation. You got to give them the latitude to figure out how it can work in their organization. Because even historically with SEO, where we had like a clear laid out plan of like, here are the best practices, here's what you do. Even if you've given people that, they don't necessarily do it, right? So like they've got to figure out what's going to work for their brand. Like what can they actually execute on? So if what we're seeing is that, you putting a post up on LinkedIn posts automatically gets you into the AI overview or the AI mode, and you're a brand that's like, hey, we don't want to be on LinkedIn, then that's not going to work for you. You've got to figure out what does. If you're a brand that's like, hey, we've got a great presence on Reddit and we know that's working, then you do that. So I think they've got to be clear on what their constraints are. And also within those constraints, how do we devise what can work for us? But in the meantime, I think what we need to do as the SEO industry, or frankly, I mean, the SEO industry is going to do or not do whatever it's going to do. But the relevance engineers that are, trying to figure this thing out and understanding that this is a huge channel shift and an opportunity to create a new category. I think it's like putting stakes in the ground to identify like what are the new best practices. And again, I think a lot of it does start from, the things we've historically learned about SEO. Like, yes, being accessible, being, something that a large language model can index. Well, they don't all index. A lot of them are just requesting in real time and not keeping cache copies of pages. But whole point is that we want to make sure that that content is available to these conversational search systems. So yes, that is like the things we've taken from historical SEO. But as far as like understanding from a first principles perspective, like how this stuff works, so then we can align it with what we're doing strategically, I think we've got to define that. And again, it starts from the understanding of where is this information coming from? How is it selected? Which we know is a function of, okay, we're looking for what ranks for this constellation of queries, but then we're identifying the most relevant passages. Then we're feeding that down the line to a series of reasoning chains that does all the synthesis, and then ultimately we get a response. So our place to start is like understanding the hidden queries. How do we rank for them? What do these passages look like? How can we augment these passages so that they perform a bit better? And then that goes into content strategy. And this content strategy needs to be about not just your website, but again, this series of sources where your content can be pulled from. So you've got to figure out like, where are you going to publish? Is it digital PR? Is it community management? Is it building a bunch of microsites? Is it, any number of things that you could be doing here? Then you got to figure out how do you execute on that? And then how do you measure that? So those four aspects are things that can be frameworks. And right now, those frameworks are not being defined because so much of our community is just being like, well, it's just SEO. Let's just build our links and write our 500 words where we use the keyword 62 times. And and there's this like expectation that you can just do what you've always done and that's going to work. And frankly, it doesn't. That's why you don't see anybody posting like, hey, here's my case study on this where I just did SEO. You just have people being like, well, where's your case study for GEO? Like, you're not more right. You're just sitting here lost like all these other people are. And you're trying to like act like you're intellectually superior in a time where you're just super fearful.
It's so frustrating because to your point, it's like there's so much nuance. It's not everything is just science and processes and cold and analytical, and everything's not like vibe marketing where you can just be like, oh, I'm going to go with my gut instinct and this is what I think works. There, like, that's why for the longest time it's that kind of integration of like the creative and the analytical. I'm really curious about, with everything changing so much, how are you thinking about short term versus long term? Like, are there things that you can do that's consequential short term that doesn't hamstring or screw you long term? Or should you only be looking like kind of long term, especially if you're like an enterprise brand that cares about bottom lines?
So I think the difference between classic SEO, well, no, I, I think the whole idea that, SEO takes a long time is a antiquated idea because Google crawls indexes a lot faster, like, and it has been, those content signals have been more valuable than people understand for a long time. So you can get great results with short-term efforts. And that's amplified or accelerated rather in these generative search environments because they have a bias towards recency. So if you're like, hey, we're going to do a big effort here and we're going to deploy a bunch of content or update a bunch of content in support of this, you are likely to see results in like 30 to 60 days. Whereas historically in SEO, we've said 6 months, which again hasn't really been true for a while. It's just like what the SEO industry kind of hides under to make sure they, elongate engagements. So I don't think there's a problem with focusing on short term because the other thing is that the things are changing so often that if you were like, okay, let's take this long-term strategy and we're only going to do it this way, we're not going to continue to learn, you're going to win for the short term, but excuse me, you may not make it to the point where your long-term strategy is executed on so you see those results. So I would say everyone should be moving very agile, very quickly, and again, testing and learning.
It's funny you talk about that. I remember when AI over the last like 5, 10 years, where people were trying to say, how do you plan for the future with everything changing? Like businesses like change so dramatically. Like right now, I feel like strategizing for like as a business 5 to 10 years down the line is such a different type of problem. Everything's so probabilistic. Everything's changing so much. Who do you think comes out on top in the end across these industries? Like what do you think is the brand that's going to like win this next phase?
I don't know if it's the brand, it's going to be the platforms that win. I mean, like, because the brands are being shuttled around in these like strange ways where it's like everyone invested in content. They built these media platforms and all this sort of stuff. And now it's like, cool, we're going to take all that and we're going to remix it. And, someone has said to me like, hey, Google needs publishers. Like they're going to have to figure something out. And to some degree, I agree. But at the same time, do they actually need publishers? Because they can still vacuum up all the UGC on the web and probably stitch that together and get the same sort of stuff, right? Like if all the news sites blocked Google, people still talk about the news. You know what I mean? They could go to Twitter, they could go to Reddit, they can go to all these different places and stitch together what the news is. So I don't necessarily know that these platforms require the content that businesses are creating or require the content that these publishers are putting out. So I think all of this is going to look very different in 5 years. And I'm not just talking about like what's going on the internet. I'm also talking about like business in general. Like so much is going to be automated. So many jobs are going to change. So many jobs are just not going to be useful anymore. So yeah, I think it's really difficult to figure out what 5 years from now is going to look like. And the best thing you can do is just keep focusing on like, what does your audience want? What is the best content we can put out? What's the best service we can make? What is going to be, the aspects that a computer can't do well? And I don't know how many of those things are going to be true 10 years from now. But nevertheless, like, let's figure out what we collectively agree that is, and then let's focus on that.
It's such a good point. Like I think about like the different industries, and you've already said it's like you can see some industries are positioned to benefit from this, like
Mhm.
e-commerce, where you're selling a product, and we've seen this from Google, is like going to have more direct to their ultimately to their stores and their purchases, whereas like the news media is has to kind of rethink their whole business model again. Like, can they survive on pure subscription models? Because ads, the whole ad game is another element. What do you anticipate with advertising within like search?
Yeah, I think advertising and search will, fundamentally change, right? Like there are going to be opportunities that you can inject your ad into a response. And perhaps they do it in such a way where it takes up more real estate and users are more likely to click on it. But it's going to be a different setup than what we have from like, what was classically called AdWords. But I think for publishers, they need to go back to the negotiation table with advertisers because they're going to get less traffic, but that traffic is still going to be valuable, and perhaps it might even be more valuable because it's like a more engaged user, which is what we're seeing across these other spaces that have AI overviews and so on, or a lot of the clicks that we're seeing come from ChatGPT tend to be people that are actively looking to take an action and what have you. So I think that may be also true in the news side of things, but they still get the same amount for impressions that they've already gotten. So they just got to go back to the table. But beyond that, I mean, I also think they need to figure out other channels for driving traffic, because this is of course not going to work.
Well, exactly, to bring it all full circle, to bring it back to where we start with relevance engineering and kind of where CMOs and VPs should start right now. Obviously, that this is a program that should have been in place a while ago. You should be doing good content, you should be doing marketing, but what are the final like takeaways from kind of what you've been saying, that if you could summarize like what VPs can do when they talk to you right now, or what they can do with their teams, what is going on right now that they should do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step is measurement. Like, taking a step to figure out like where do you stand. And I think tools like Profound specifically is the best one as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, just getting a snapshot of where you stand and also understanding like, is your audience using these different platforms? I think we all kind of take for granted that like all audiences use ChatGPT, and that's not inherently true. It doesn't make sense for us to be like, hey, here's your strategy for Perplexity if your audience doesn't use Perplexity. So I think audience research is even more important than it has historically been. So starting in that measurement and audience understanding phase, and then from there, figuring out how is your content positioned to perform here. And so really like this omni-media content audit that I'm talking about, and then putting together a plan of how we can get more of those. So the way I look at it is like in these query fan out environments, it's all about having as many candidate passages as possible. And the way I think about it is like it's like a raffle. You want to get as many raffle tickets as you can so that you have a higher likelihood of winning the raffle. So it just makes everything a lot more matrix. It makes it we all just have to go back to the table on our content strategy because it's not just about our websites anymore.
Yeah, there's no set it or let it. It's all about tightening up, and yet at the same time making sure you're filling in all the different gaps, because you're getting that from the query fan out. Like there are ways to do that. Mike, thanks. We're gonna keep doing this. We're gonna talk more. Any parting words for the folks until we see them next time?
Nobody knows what they're doing, but we do.
There you go. Check us out. iPullRank. Thanks, folks.